Hello, AP. I hope you guys are doing swell and dandy. This will be our last video regarding the required Caesar and Virgil material because John will be taking his AP test on Tuesday, and he's going to do awesome. So on for Wednesday and following, I'll have some more, I guess, fun videos. Maybe we'll see. Probably have some readings for you or something like that. So just to keep you in the proverbial loop here. So we're going to look at 618 to 620 from Caesar. And in these sections, he describes some beliefs and customs of the Gauls. So 618, we learn that the Gauls trace their descent to the god Pluto, also known as Dis. In your book notes, a lot of ancient peoples believed they believed themselves descended from the earth, sprung from the earth, a term called autochthonous. Kind of fun word. Also, gods or deities that are kind of associated with the earth or under the earth are often called chthonic deities as well. So it's another fun term. All right. They also reckon their time by number of nights rather than by days. Okay, so that's an interesting thing to keep in mind as well. And remember, the Romans used the term ora, hour. They had 24 of them in a day, but they were of different lengths depending on when in the year you were talking. So days were divided into 12 hours, nights were divided into 12 hours. All right, so in summer the days would be longer, in winter the days would be shorter. Okay, so that's a good thing to keep in mind. Also, regarding time, Julius Caesar was as the Pontifex Maximus, the greatest priest. He is actually responsible for helping to reform the Roman calendar, and he is largely it's the Julian calendar, as it's called, is very similar to what we have even today. All right. Another term to kind of be familiar with, the word Fausti, is something also you will come across when you're looking at dates and that sort of thing. And Fausti is basically like a chronological listing of people or events. And the poet Ovid actually has a work known as the Fausti, in which he kind of has basically like interviews with the gods. And Ovid, just kind of as a side note, he was roughly a contemporary of Virgil. I think he came a little bit after, but in the Augustan time period. So he's a good one to know about. And he is wrote a lot of what are called elegies or elegiac couplets. An elegy was like, you've got elegiac couplet, at least, is a hexameter line. So like we did dactylic hexameter, hexameter line, and then a pentameter line. So fun little tidbits. Okay, so end of 618, we also learn about how the Gauls treated their children, at least a little bit, in that the children were not allowed to approach the father in public. And this would have been something rather unique to the Romans, or I mean, would seem odd to the Romans, as the Roman children, at least the boys, would often accompany their fathers on business. All right, and apparently the reason is the Gauls believed that these children would weaken the fighting spirit of their of their fathers, which does make some sense. Okay, 619, we get a picture of a little bit of marriage life. Well, not practices, I guess would probably be a better word. The dowry that a wife brings to the marriage is appears to be matched by the man, and they have their kind of accounts joined or mingled. However, there is a reckoning that is kept of both sides of the account. So, if the man's property or whatever does well, that's kept note of. If the woman's property does well, that's kept note of as well. The Romans apparently did not do this, did not have this mingling, so the wife's resources were kept separate, the husband's kept separate. So that would have been something unique that the Romans would have noted. Also, we find out about the paterfamilias, and this was something the Romans were well versed in. The paterfamilias was the head of the household, who had, for the most part, absolute control over his house. He did have the power of life and death, particularly over his children, and in the Gallic society over his wife as well. And the Romans did not have that power of life and death over the wife, at least not in recent times. So this would have, to a Roman mind, would have appeared rather backward. And also we find this very sad detail about if a paterfamilias has died under suspicious circumstances, the wife is sometimes tortured in interrogation and even killed. So it's a very very sad detail about that, and it's likened to in Roman society, the testimony of slaves was only admissible if it was gotten under torture, through torture. So it's a really terrible way in which they treated these women. All right. At the end of 619, we have a little section on some Gallic funeral practices. And Caesar does mention that they were magnificent and expensive. The things that were dear to the deceased would be put into the fire with them, as well as animals and even slaves and clients. Although the slaves and clients it sounds from Caesar that was a practice that had fallen away. Although he does say Paulo supra hanc memoriam, so basically that this was in recent memory, although they weren't practicing this now, this human sacrifice right now. It was fairly recent that they used to do that. Although they do still, as Caesar notes, at least with the Wicker Men story, it does appear that they still practice that, at least a certain form of human sacrifice. All right. Now, the Romans also had very elaborate funeral rituals. That would be an interesting study if you're interested in looking into some of that. But they would set up really elaborate monuments and everything outside the city. You're not supposed to be, the dead were not supposed to be buried in the city. So they'd be outside the city, kind of along the roads. And eventually it got so out of hand that they would even have to limit the number of professional mourners that you could have, because you could hire professional mourners to bewail the dead. So All right, 620 then. We learn a little bit about some of the freedoms or lack thereof that are practiced in the Gallic state. We learn that they have a law that basically if you hear anything from your neighbor about a rumor or anything like that concerning the state, that you are supposed to bring it to the magistrate and not tell it to your friends. Don't spread the rumor weed. And this is so that that people do not get needlessly frightened, that they don't get impelled to evil deeds, or that they don't take matters of life and death into their own hands. So it's very very rational sort of thing, but at the same time, you can see that this is a very controlling sort of state. You do not have the freedom of speech that we hold very, very dear. And he tells at the end of 620, the magistrates will hide those things that they think are that they think best, and then they'll let the people know about the things they think are useful, and that it's only in the council, the assembly, that it's permitted to speak about the state. So you do see this kind of lack of freedom of speech in the Gallic society. And your book notes that the Romans didn't have necessarily a freedom to assemble and talk however they wanted, but they were allowed to basically say mostly what they needed to, so long as it wasn't like needlessly slandering someone or something like that. Also important to note here too that Caesar, one of the things Caesar did was he would actually make the goings on of the Senate and everything. He basically published those for the people, which is a big kind of a big deal, because the Senate a lot of times like to keep what they did kind of insulated and everything, but Caesar would basically record the minutes, if you will, of what was going on, and he more or less published that. So that's an interesting thing from his point of view. And also, I mean, if you look at the very book, the commentary on the Gallic War, what he's doing is he's not just writing to the Senate to let them know what's going on. He is this is meant for the rest of the Romans. So he is trying to be keep those common people kind of in the loop, if you will. All right. All right. So that is our conclusion for today. John, make sure you're reviewing, obviously, the rest of the other sections, which I'm sure you have been. But units 1 through 4 is what you're responsible for. So, love you guys, and I'll talk to you later.